How good is Ritchie Blackmore as a guitar player? That's a question, isn't it?
Ritchie Blackmore is probably one of the greatest guitar players of all time.
In my opinion, Ritchie Blackmore is the greatest guitarist of his generation.
He epitomises, for my money, the greatest guitar players that have ever come out of Britain.
To me, Ritchie Blackmore in rock and roll terms is as good a guitarist as you'll get.
You don't lead from the fore as a guitarist, a band like Deep Purple, unless you're not one of the greatest guitar players of all time.
He's got a vibrant way of playing, a melody and tone that I don't think anyone's managed to replicate. You get people like Yngwie Malmsteen who can play fast and certainly plays in the style of Blackmore. They don't have the feel of Ritchie Blackmore. And whether people like or hate the man, you know, no one can take away from the fact he has this incredibly fluid style, especially when he plays a Stratocaster.
He's a total one-off. He's like otherworldly, really. I think he's a phenomenal guitarist, phenomenal. I mean, there's nobody like him in the world. I don't think there ever will be. You know, the man's driven purely by passion and by genius, some sort of genius that I'm not even sure he's aware of it himself, but it's just phenomenal, yeah.
He's criminally underrated as a guitarist. In my opinion, he's the finest guitarist that ever has been or ever will be. He's got the skills of the compositional skills of a Mozart, and he's got the technique and the ability to play like Paganini. He's got everything that you need in a musician.
I remember first seeing Ritchie in the early 60s when I was a guitar player learning my trade, and he was only a couple of years, probably 3 or 4 years older than myself. And we went along to see, with my brother, to see Screaming Lord Sutch and the Savages, and Ritchie Blackmore was in the band. And even at this early time, in the early 60s, he was doing stuff that was far ahead of its time. Feedback, I never even knew as a young guitarist what the hell feedback was, and there was Ritchie on stage with the Savages, playing a Gibson 335 through a Vox AC30 amp, and I remember thinking, what the hell is that that's going on? And of course, much later I realised, oh, it's just feedback. But he was a master at controlling feedback way back then, and let's remember that this, in the early 60s, this was long before Hendrix came on the scene. One of the things surrounding the mystique of Ritchie Blackmore was he had this reputation of being a very, very moody and eccentric guy. Certainly he's shown eccentricities, but I believe he's a guy that believes in the music he believes in. But I went to a couple of gigs, and there was this atmosphere in the stage. There was always a kind of tension on stage, which maybe fired the excitement. One never knew, is he going to cop the needle with somebody and walk off stage, as he's been known to do with Deep Purple many times. But I think when you're that highly evolved as a player, I think you are a complex person.
Blackmore's inspirations came from slightly different areas than some other guitarists. A very intelligent man, and we have to admit, maybe not all musicians the sharpest tools in the box. Blackmore was an incredibly intelligent man, a man who was interested in not just the style of music he was playing. I mean, he looked to his Elizabethan medieval classical music. There would be instrumental B-sides that were based on classical works that he was particularly fond of. And this is a guy looking beyond the norm.
Ritchie Blackmore is probably the best guitarist there is and has ever been. He's just, I think he really plays with his heart. It's almost like every single bit of pain and emotion that the guy's ever been through in his life is all there just dripping from his guitar when he's playing, and that's a rare quality in a guitarist, I think. To just, you're almost hearing him plugging himself in when he plays the guitar.
There are three key elements that I feel about Ritchie Blackmore that makes him stand out quite uniquely. The first is that I think he's got a great technique, although he himself often plays that down, and probably does himself a disservice. But I think the fact that he started with a classical tuition when he started playing at 11 years of age, he got the classical foundations of music in place and the techniques employed with the finger techniques of playing, etc. So that's the first element. The second element is that he plays with a lot of feel. He's a very emotional guitar player as well, and that really comes out in a lot of the work that he does. And then the third key element, I think, is the fact that he's a brilliant improviser. Now, if you take those three elements together, the technique is one you sort of associate with classical musicians, the feel with blues musicians, and the improvisation with jazz musicians. To find a musician that encompasses all three of them is pretty rare. I think that's why Ritchie Blackmore stands out in rock, because he's got that unique ability to combine the three things together. And that is indeed a rare combination, I think, and that to me makes him a really special guitar player. And I've been wanting to say that for years.
Sometimes I used to watch him, and sometimes he would make it look really complicated and awkward and difficult. He would be throwing his hands over here when he was playing a deceptively simple piece, and then when he was playing a really complicated piece, he made it look really easy. But he's very contradictory in everything that he does. You know, he wants to have songs on the jukebox because that's where he thinks. That's what he told me. Where you know then that you've arrived if you go in and someone's playing your songs on the jukebox. But at the same time, he rejects the celebrity that comes with success. He rejects that. So he's a guy of many contrasts and opposites, which makes him a fascinating character.
You were always aware that you had to get it right. I remember him going through a few songs with me in a sound check, and I had to learn them there and then. And very quickly, and you kind of felt his presence, like he was listening to everything everybody was doing all the time. He's very, very passionate about what he's doing. He isn't doing it just for the sake of it. He's into every note he plays. And you're aware that everything you're doing, he's aware of. So you kind of, you have to be on the ball, really. You have to be into it, but on the ball. And, you know, if you're not, then you know that he knows you're not. But I remember him showing me one song and going through about 30 different chords I'd never even seen before. And he was winding me up completely, you know, and I thought, what's this? And, you know, he says he was only joking, like, you know. But it was really, really quite stressful at the time because, you know, playing alongside one of your heroes.
There's no doubt that Ritchie Blackmore was a mercurial guitarist, but he could also be a somewhat moody individual. He'd formed Rainbow after he'd got frustrated within the confines of Deep Purple. But despite coming up with some of the greatest heavy metal riffs ever written, he didn't seem to derive that much pleasure from them. In fact, increasingly you got the sense that he didn't really like some of the stuff he was playing.
I think sometimes he hasn't actually come across on record as well as he might have done. He can go off at tangents and do something which is quite different from what another guitarist would do or a regular guitarist would do. And occasionally I feel he takes it a bit too far away, where he'll just be kind of making funny noises with the tremolo arm or doing some kind of trick, and it doesn't have much musical substance.
I think his place in the guitar greats is not as defined as it should be. He's a great technician. He can play all the hammering and the trills and everything else. And he never relied on masses of distortion to carry his technique. A few very well-respected guitar players, if you hear them sitting down with just an acoustic guitar, are completely snookered without this wall of feedback and distortion. Ritchie could cut the mustard just playing a simple acoustic guitar part. Great technician.
A lot of guitarists can tend to sound the same. So I think his own skill and his own technique and his feel for the music comes across with his own unique sound, and that's a very crucial element of being a great guitarist. As soon as you hear the guy play, you know that's Ritchie Blackmore.
You have to realise that Ritchie Blackmore is probably one of the greatest rock composers that Britain, or probably the world, has ever produced. In Deep Purple, he was responsible for creating effectively the heavy metal sound. He was instrumental in not just the music they created, but the whole genre. He created that by the skill in composition. Was the first album a great album? Well, probably not, but it was certainly a very good album. It had some excellent material on there. There were 3 or 4 standout tracks on that album.
Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow was a great album. There was quite a few classics on there, but a really strong first album for any band, really. You could really tell the energy was there. They were Ritchie was moving away from something that he had with Deep Purple and sort of putting everything into this new project. Probably something that he dreamed of for some time.
Personally, it wasn't my favourite Rainbow album, but yeah, I thought it was a great album, a great introduction to what they were doing.
Man on the Silver Mountain's actually a fantastic introduction to Rainbow. It has all the elements that carried on being a thread through Rainbow songs. It was very powerful, beautifully constructed rock stroke pop song, you know, fantastically sung by Ronnie James Dio. It's
the Ritchie Blackmore riffing again, isn't it? Da, 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 da. Very kind of, not Deep Purple, but very, this is how we sound like and this is how we're going to carry on, you know. He had his trademark kind of riffing, and it just kind of explodes from there, really. You know, it starts with the riff and definitely kind of a signature of Rainbow's sound, really, throughout.
Man on Silver Mountain's a great song. It introduces the band with gusto and confidence. One of the things I love is that on the verse you've got the trademark Blackmore arpeggios. He's playing away on the top, these lovely cascading series of notes that really make the difference to that song. There are very few guitarists who could carry that off with that level of confidence and skill. It's interesting if you compare the first Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow album were what Deep Purple were doing at the time. They were producing Come Taste the Band with Tommy Bolin. And in my opinion, the Ritchie Blackmore album is infinitely superior. And I think it vindicates what Blackmore was saying at the time. He was famously critical of the fact that Deep Purple were producing what he called shoeshine music. And by that, I think he meant there was a lot of funk creeping into the band. Glenn Hughes was very keen to introduce a funky element into Deep Purple, which was not what people came to that band for in the first place. So this was Blackmore's reaction. He left the band and he formed his own Rainbow, which was much more in the European classical tradition, I suppose, is the foundation that the album's built on.
It's difficult to compare Deep Purple albums with Rainbow albums, especially of two that came out at similar times. Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, to some people, may be a better album than Come Taste the Band that Deep Purple did at the same time. But I think really Ritchie Blackmore was the driving force behind Deep Purple, and there was something really missing at that point.
There was something there. You could tell that he was working on something that was real, and it wasn't kind of a band that was exhausted and trying to just keep turning over albums for the sake of albums. The Rainbow album was, it was like, listen to this is something that's going to be going for a while, and this is exciting. You know?
Century Greensleeves really saw the beginnings of Ritchie Blackmore sort of really reaching to his roots, his influences. You know, you have the sort of the medieval, the Renaissance influence coming through there, and I think it was probably something that if you listen to his playing, you know, you can see, and then the construction of songs, it's always there, lots of fourths and fifths. But this was really sort of like blatantly Ritchie telling people, this is what I'm about and this is what I'm going to write about, you know.
It's an indicator as to where Blackmore is ultimately going to go with his career. His influences are not just classical music, but even earlier, we're talking medieval and Renaissance music. And this is the first indicator that ultimately the journey is going to take us in a completely different direction.
He's always had that kind of medieval kind of sound and vibe to him. I mean, some people say, you know, he picked it up later on, but I think it's always been there. Since the early Deep Purple, really, when he was messing about. And I think it was something that he'd wanted to do for a while, I would imagine. It turned like a classic tune into something that's, you know, it was a real good rock song, and he still plays it these days as well. You know.
Blackmore builds his technique very much on the Western classical tradition. He's influenced by J.S. Bach and by Beethoven. That's where his heart is, and it's on those foundations that he's built his technique. I remember going to see Rainbow in 1977, and in between numbers, almost without thinking, Blackmore would just lightly toss out one of Bach's preludes and fugues. I mean, he's constantly revisiting Bach. I think if the first album suffered from anything, it was the fact that the production wasn't terribly confident, I suppose. It's not the fantastic sound that you're about to hear on Rainbow Rising.
Rainbow Rising was all the forces of the universe coming together at the one time.
Stargazer is probably the first real Rainbow classic. There's a bit of a Led Zeppelin touch to the beginning of it, but it's Ronnie James Dio's strong tenor voice that really gives the song its character, along with the vocal harmonies.
It has all the elements that Rainbow was in the 70s. Thunderous drums from Cozy, pumping bass lines from Jimmy Bain, great keyboards from Tony Carey, outrageous guitar playing from Ritchie, and of course you've got Ronnie just weaving his magical melodies and lyrics throughout this wonderful piece of music.
It's a great track. It's a slow plodding 4/4, roughly 88 beats a minute. And what is great is that it meanders from 88 to 86 beats a minute up to 89. It's got this wonderful slinky feel to it, which just reinforces to me that a great drummer like Cozy Powell is far better than any drum machine any day of the week.
I remember when it first came out, it was amazing. You know, it's a massive rock anthem, really, and a great storyline, fantastic riff. I mean, you know, the riff is kind of stupidly simple, but it's so effective, you'll never forget it. And the song really takes you somewhere, you know, the power of it, it drives, you know, and it kind of takes you up and up and up and up and up, and his guitars, and it's all falling. It's kind of the song, the music describes the story that's going on as well.
One of the interesting things is Dio's storytelling. He can sketch in a few lines and we get the whole background to the story, very subtly done. The stories themselves aren't subtle, they're not to my taste, they're fantasy images and dragons and all of that kind of stuff. Isn't the kind of thing that I would respond to, but Dio handles it with great skill. Just with a few lines he sketches in the background of these people being trapped and forced to slave labour, and it's really quite clever. He takes it from the perspective of the labourers who are captured and forced to build the tower. It's very nicely realised.
It's an 8-minute prog rock song with all of the band contributing until Ritchie Blackmore comes in midway through with a solo that's quite unlike anything he's done before. So it really is defining a new sense of the band and indeed of Ritchie Blackmore.
The solo is masterful. It shows that the guy has obviously learnt a few scales, and when it builds into this wonderful long slow fade from the A minor to the G and round and round and round, the long fade, it just builds the tension in the listener.
And then of course there's the Munich Philharmonic Orchestra playing away in the background, who provide that classical metal fusion.
I think the Munich Philharmonic are icing on the cake, to tell you the truth. I think the track could work equally as well if they weren't there. But the way they sneak them in towards the end of the fade is absolutely great.
Rising is their Stairway to Heaven. And it's funny, actually, I mentioned Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin. If you listen to Stargazer, it's built around a very similar riff to Kashmir. Led Zeppelin's Kashmir. It's got that da-da-da, da-da-da, that slow building, almost mystical kind of sound.
Some people have been a little bit critical of it, saying that he got the idea from Led Zeppelin's Kashmir. Perhaps he did to some extent. I know he was an admirer of that song, but everybody gets influences and ideas from other people's work. The key thing is, what's the end result? And with Stargazer, it was undoubtedly 7 minutes of absolutely blistering rock music. There's no doubt in my mind that Stargazer was the Rainbow composition. I think Ritchie Blackmore said that himself in interviews over the years as well, that he was extremely proud of that piece of music, and rightly so. I think it showed the full depth of Blackmore's musical vision, incorporating the orchestra and the general arrangement of the music.
I remember asking Ronnie James Dio once when I interviewed him if, when they were recording it, they knew they had something special, and he said yes. He said, you know, there was a feeling that something like, you know, something was going down here.
Cozy Powell played me that song before it was released, and you're sitting in his car with the stereo cranked up, and it really sounded awesome, I must say.
Stargazer was an amazing song, an absolute classic, and I think most people that are Rainbow fans would probably say it's up there in their top 10 favourite Rainbow songs, if not their most their favourite song. It's a song with a story, which makes it very strong to begin with. And again, a very energetic, very powerful song with an absolutely fantastic vocal again. But to say whether it was the best thing that Rainbow ever produced, I think there's a lot of strength across a whole spectrum of Rainbow albums.
It's one of these great songs that builds and reaches its climactic point and leaves you almost breathless. Terrific song. And yes, the best thing Rainbow ever did.
For me, Rainbow was about Ritchie Blackmore and Cozy Powell in the early days.
Cozy Powell was the archetypal thumper. I mean, he was a fantastic belter of the skins.
A rock legend. You don't get to be named in great circles unless you are that great.
Cozy Powell was a drummer of, I would think, of epic proportions. He never did things in halves.
Just about everything he played on, he had a very heavy, harsh style, but it always worked.
For kind of quintessential British rock music, I'd have him on drums any day.
Cozy Powell was an excellent drummer and a tragic loss to the rock world when he died several years ago in a terrible car crash. He was a lad, he was one of the boys, and boy could he play drums. He was, bombastic, with his arms like an octopus just going all over the place. But again, a drummer that understood what he was doing.
Very, very reliable. If you see them ever saw them on stage, he was the powerhouse, he was always there.
I think Ritchie Blackmore wanted a more visual impact on stage than he had had with Deep Purple, and certainly with Cozy Powell he had somebody who was more than capable of that.
When it came to his solos, he used to be, Cozy would turn into a real showman, and he'd also, he started choreographing his solos with lighting, which before that hadn't really been done.
When I went to see Rainbow the first time, I think it would be 1976, and he of course did an amazing drum solo to the 1812 Overture that just blew everybody away and nearly blew the whole place up because of the flamethrowers and the explosions and stuff. And that cemented his reputation.
His own style, that everything was over the top. And I think that sometimes comes through with the drumming. He used to hit the drums probably as hard as anybody I've ever heard. But he was also a very reliable drummer. He had a very solid rhythm. He could keep very steady beats. As he himself said, he wasn't technically a great drummer, but I think he played with a lot of feel and a lot of passion.
At his best, Cozy Powell matched any of the other hard rock drummers of the 70s. Arguably, he never really got the chance to shine with Rainbow, although some people say that he perhaps lacked the dedication that went with his undoubted talent and skill.
There are only very few drummers who actually have their own distinctive style. You think maybe of John Bonham or Neil Peart or Bill Bruford, but you can almost count them on the fingers of one hand, and Cozy Powell was one of these drummers who developed his own distinctive sound, which is a very difficult thing to do.
He never had the finesse of, say, Ian Pace, but that's not to say that he was a bad drummer, because he was far from it. He was an extremely good drummer. But Ian Pace had a finesse that I think was almost impossible to follow.
He helped Ritchie to define what Rainbow was about. Some people often don't think of a drummer as defining the character of a band, but if you listen to those early recordings, it was very much about Ritchie and Cozy, and he was, again, like Ritchie, a consummate technician. I think they were a great pair together.
Bass-wise, for me, the kind of style of bass playing in Rainbow isn't totally my kind of thing. It's usually very good players, but they're generally playing with a pick, and it becomes rather generic for me that they're not contributing as much in a melodic sense or a rhythmic sense as I would like to hear. They're doing a great job, and they're playing incredibly solidly and tightly, and just absolutely in the pocket, and that's what a lot of people want from the bass. And I'm possibly the odd one out who wants to hear something different and doesn't particularly like that kind of sound. So for me, the bass playing in Rainbow wouldn't have particularly been an influence on me, but I have great regard for the guys who are in the band, Jimmy Bain, Bob Daisley, Roger Glover, etc., etc. But it's the style of bass playing where you're kind of serving others instead of expressing yourself.
I don't think anyone in their right mind would term on stage a classic live album, but it's, for a long, long time, it was the only live document that existed for Rainbow.
Well, the first Rainbow live album certainly is one of the classic Rainbow albums, and originally it was brought out as a Japanese release only, and then of course got worldwide release. It's quite a short double album, but it encompasses most of the good tracks from the first and second Rainbow albums. Very good example of live playing from the band.
I remember when Rainbow on stage came out, there was, for some reason, a lot of criticism of it. Initially, I recall people criticising it because it was more expensive than any other record in the store. And the second thing was because, although it was a double live, it was quite short. It was only about 60 minutes. But if you forget about that for a moment, the actual music that was on it was extremely good.
It's a strange one. It was recorded on the Rainbow Rising tour, and the band were already starting to introduce material from Long Live Rock and Roll. So it opens with Kill the King from an album that hasn't even been released yet. It features an odd choice of tracks from well, actually very few tracks from Rising, and it's certainly, I mean, it doesn't include Stargazer, which seems remarkably odd.
And that's something that, to this day, still is mind-boggling for many of the fans. But that aside, the actual performances of the pieces on there were terrific, and the overall sound, as I say, that Martin Birch managed to get from the band was also a crucial element into making it a very powerful live recording.
Light is all I see, it's shining there for you and me.
Catch the Rainbow was a fantastic album track, and it's always going to be an amazing song, but it actually had a life of its own when it was brought to the stage. You know, it's a fantastic live version of that song.
Blackmore would stretch it anywhere up to 25 minutes, and his solos would just go wherever he decided to take you. And Catch the Rainbow live became a real tour de force. It was his vehicle to be able to express himself as a guitarist, and as we know, he was more than capable of doing that. And I think if you take the live album, there is an absolute tour de force. It's a master class in rock guitar from Ritchie Blackmore.
There's a structure of a song there, but you can tell he's dictating it all the time. He's, you know, when he's live, he was kind of taking the band wherever he wanted to take it and stuff, and he would drop it. He's brilliant at dropping things to nothing and then suddenly bursting in, you know, with the energy and that charisma and that passion that he has. And on that particular song live, yeah, I think it was incredible.
On stage has got some great moments. I think the track Mistreated is one of the finest ever live recordings of a rock band. His solo is fantastic. The way he develops the solo, the scales that he plays, the use of feedback and trills is absolutely wonderful.
Rainbow on Stage is a classic live album. It's a classic live album because it captures the ultimate lineup of Rainbow, which is Jimmy Bain, Tony Carey, Cozy Powell, Ronnie Dio and Ritchie Blackmore. And it catches them when they're at their peak.
Despite featuring what most people consider to be the classic lineup of Rainbow, Rainbow Live was a strangely lacklustre album. Most of the songs weigh in at about 10 minutes or so, but you get the feeling that some of them have been dragged out for too long.
Personally, I've never really liked the sound, the production work on it. Given that Rainbow sounded very polished, it's quite a raw album, and that rawness I don't think suits the band. I don't know, I'm personally not happy with the production sound.
Perhaps the real problem with the album was that on record they were Rainbow, but on stage they became Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow.
He has shown to great effect on that live album. Some great keyboard playing as well, and Man on the Silver Mountain features a fantastic vocal from Dio. I think it's really, really great. But I would have liked just one more live album around that period because I think they could have really peaked.
I think Long Live Rock and Roll is a great opener to a great album.
It's one of those songs that's saying thank you.
The song Rock and Roll itself celebrates exactly what it says. Exactly what it says. It's simple, but it's effective.
Imagine if they're playing it live, you've got the band on stage giving out this high energy sort of rock and roll, and you imagine the way the audience would be reacting, a terrific reaction, an interaction between band and audience. It would be quite remarkable. Send shivers down the spine. terrifically uplifting song, it's got a great riff, and over the top you've just got this tremendous voice coming from this tiny little guy.
As has often been said about Dio, he was the little man with the big voice. I think he needed to have, because when Ritchie Blackmore put Rainbow together, I suppose essentially he was carrying on with the same sort of music that he'd done with Deep Purple, the loud, aggressive, hard-hitting rock music. So you've got to have a vocalist that is capable of being able to deliver a good vocal performance over the top of a very powerful backing, and certainly Ronnie Dio was more than capable of doing that.
Long Live Rock and Roll really features the vocal range of Dio. It's a classic rock shuffle in 12/8 in G. He effortlessly hits high Ds all day long. I have to say, I think the song is a little bit predictable. I think the chorus these days probably sounds a bit old-fashioned. It's a great showcase for Dio.
He's got a tremendous ability to combine, musicality with raw energy and, great leadership. He's got fantastic awareness of phrasing, of pitching, all the kind of technicalities that you need to be a good singer, along with this, real kind of screaming frontman image, which he has.
I think he set the bar pretty high with tracks like Long Live Rock and Roll, because it's so high and so powerful, and you can just imagine that some covers band is really going to come off badly if they try and do that while on stage.
He also has a different side to him, which you can hear on the track Rainbow Eyes, where he's exploring the vocal nuances in a more baroque setting.
Love should be a simple blend.
And he just shows the quality and tone of his voice as if he's singing to a small child, trying to put this child to sleep. It's just so beautiful the way that he phrases it, and he's a great lyricist.
Dio matched his tales of medieval magic and wizardry to Ritchie Blackmore's Renaissance guitar riffs, and together they defined the early character of Rainbow.
From the same album, there were some other great performances from him as well. Kill the King, Rainbow Eyes, which showed the gentler side of Dio, was also a great track. But I think Long Live Rock and Roll can show the punter that he really can cut the mustard. Great vocal range, great power.
Live, 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 live.
Long Live Rock and Roll was a good album and a good song, but I think most people who listened to Rainbow, by the time they brought the third album out, were well and truly hooked on really the first and second album.
Rainbow Rising set the standard for the band, but Long Live Rock and Roll was probably more effective in bringing out its character. It combined the straight-ahead rock of the first album with perhaps more progressive metal of the second.
Long Live Rock and Roll was always going to have a hard job to follow that. And I think one of the things, particularly for me, was Kill the King, because they had done it live and they had done it on stage. And it had such an energy and such a passion and such an aggression that was lacking from the Long Live Rock and Roll album.
Perhaps one of the criticisms of Long Live Rock and Roll is that, which has always been a criticism of Blackmore's music throughout his career, some people say, well, he has a tendency to go over the same ground, come up with the same ideas, or use a riff on a different track, utilising the same riff again. But I think it's unfair to criticise him for that, because if you make a comparison, classical composers used to do that all the time.
Ritchie said, listen, if I'm repeating myself, let me know. And I said, right, okay. He says, because you know my stuff better than I do, and I've got a tendency that I sometimes repeat myself. So he came up with the riff. I said, you can't do that, man. Why not? It can't happen here. Yeah, but that was one of my songs. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Gates of Babylon is similar to Stargazer, with the keyboards providing an atmospheric Arabic feel to the music, some vivid lyrics and a whole barrel full of riffs from Ritchie Blackmore.
Gates of Babylon really starts with this great menacing kind of Eastern riff, really real energetic again from Powell, from all the members really driving it, and lyrically it's tailor-made for Dio's voice. It's superb.
Of course, Gates of Babylon is an astonishing piece of work and one of the classic Rainbow songs, but unfortunately never played live for whatever reason. And that middle section that I think that David Rosenthal, who was the keyboard player at the time, inserted in that Ritchie soloed over, is amazing.
I think one of the key things that makes Gates of Babylon such an interesting piece is the Eastern scales that Blackmore uses on his guitar. Again, this is where the comparison with Stargazer comes in, because there's similar technique is employed on that track as well. But it really does make for an epic sounding piece of music with these Eastern kind of sounds that he used to employ on the guitar.
It features once again Ritchie's love of the Eastern kind of scales, where you're in E and you're not sure if you're in E minor or E major, and the riff which features the E to the F natural to the G sharp and the augmented fifth, the B to the C. Very typical Ritchie Blackmore riff.
I think he got the idea and the influence of doing that from his love of medieval music, and incorporated all that into the whole rock idiom and the whole structure of a song like Gates of Babylon.
For me, the song dips slightly in the middle with the guitar solo from Blackmore. It's a great solo, but it never quite reaches a gear that I'm trying to will it to reach. It could go to a sixth gear and it needs the whole band to kind of move up with it. The kind of sound they created at the beginning of the song just slightly dips in the middle, and then as soon as Dio comes back in at the end, you've found that whole energy.
The complex time changes and the addition of the orchestra fill out the sound and make it a perfect vehicle for Ronnie James Dio's voice.
The vocal is great. I think once again the Munich Philharmonic are on there. I believe it's the Munich Philharmonic providing the orchestral touch. Again reinforcing the Eastern kind of scale with the augmented fifth and everything else. I personally would have liked to have heard a little bit more of that lovely sexy violin solo on the fade out, but that's just me.
Gates of Babylon is one of those songs that to some people was an attempt to remake Stargazer with the orchestral arrangements. But I think that does it a disservice. It's as good a song in its own right. It stands up on its own.
It's Ritchie that's the driving machine here. He's the guy that's coming up with the arrangements, and it's him. And again, the other musicians round about him have to understand that, and they add their own elements in there. And I think Gates of Babylon is a classic track. Classic track.
Gates of Babylon for me was a career highlight, probably because of the album that it was on. That was probably the pinnacle of their career at the time.
It really is a very, very, very good song. But then most of Rainbow's songs were very, very, very good songs. They didn't fall below the creative line too often. So, which means that their absolute classics or career highlights have got to be unbelievably good songs. And that's what Stargazer is. Gates of Babylon, in the top 10, but not a career highlight.
The Swedish guitarist Yngwie Malmsteen, who is a big Blackmore fan and was heavily influenced by Blackmore, cites that as Blackmore's best composition. And if Yngwie Malmsteen thinks it's Blackmore's best composition, then I'm not going to argue with that.
Long Live Rock and Roll may have suffered due to the disruptions within the band. Mark Clark had gone, Tony Carey had gone, and midway through it I think Bob Daisley and David Stone came in, which can't have been conducive to a smooth working atmosphere. But even so, there were some great moments on there. The title track was excellent. But it was... I was a little bit disappointed with it after Rainbow Rising, but if one looks at all the circumstances surrounding it, the personnel disruptions, then I think it's a very creditable album.
I remember when I first heard the album Long Live Rock and Roll, my initial reaction was it was a lot more commercial than Rainbow Rising. But I think when you listen back to it now, there's the same kind of thread that really runs through those two albums. I would certainly say that Rainbow Rising's got the edge, but Long Live Rock and Roll was very much in the same vein and also had a host of really good rock songs on it.
Nowadays, when you look back on Rainbow's career, Long Live Rock and Roll was probably their peak. You had all the kind of adrenaline and the high power energy that you get from Rising, but you combine this with kind of great melodic riffs and a slightly kind of cleaner sound as well. The production was slightly different. You get, fantastic melodies and riffs with the raw energy that you've got from Rainbow Rising. With those ingredients, you've got a cracking album.
The unit of Blackmore, Dio and Cozy Powell particularly, augmented by Jimmy Bain and Tony Carey, produced what some people think is arguably the finest live moments of Rainbow's career. The shows, I suppose there's a carry-on from the Deep Purple where Blackmore was doing all this improvisation, incorporating classical melodies and ideas, but at some point taking them to another level as well. The tracks on the first Rainbow album, like Catch the Rainbow, really weren't done justice in the studio, but when they put it out live, it would extend to 15-20 minutes and Blackmore would go off into a whole new territory really of his own. And it really was probably a golden age of his playing, I think, that particular era. I think when Graeme Bonnet initially came into Rainbow, there was a few raised eyebrows from some people, but you have to understand that Ritchie Blackmore had this idea that he wanted to take the band into a more commercial direction, and Ronnie Dio wasn't comfortable with that, so it was inevitable that he was going to move on.
Graeme Bonnet was brought in for the Down to Earth album in 1979 along with Don Airey and Roger Glover. And a lot of the hardcore fans have questioned whether he was a suitable replacement, whether he was hard enough. He's certainly more refined, I think one would say. I guess you would say it's a cleaner voice.
Technically, he had a good voice, but it wasn't a particularly distinctive voice. And You would have expected somebody with a stronger rock pedigree to come into the camp at that time.
He has an incredibly powerful voice, but in a sense it's not a traditional hard rock voice. So some people didn't like it, and they didn't like his image, which was a very non-heavy rock sort of image.
He had short hair, and I mean, you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter really how long or short your hair is, depending on how talented you are. But no, marketing, which is becoming ever so important these days, even back then meant, you know, like all the kids that like Rainbow, most of them were growing their hair long, and most of the members of Rainbow had long hair. And why hasn't the singer got long hair? You know, and he favoured a neat sort of swept back look, silly aviator shades on, and he favoured Hawaiian shirts. And he, you know, he didn't look the part.
I thought it was great. I thought the look really worked for the new venture that Rainbow was becoming. And he undoubtedly sang on two of the most commercially successful songs that Rainbow ever had, which were Since You've Been Gone and All Night Long. Now, whether those songs are classic Rainbow songs, in my opinion, no, I don't think they are. But they are the most known Rainbow songs.
This is the genius of Ritchie Blackmore. Not only had he created a hugely successful career in Deep Purple, he then creates a hugely successful Rainbow, and halfway through that career he suddenly makes a decision that he'd like to have his songs on the jukebox and he'd like to make it more commercial. The music business is incredibly difficult to survive. It's incredibly difficult to make one career happen. But Blackmore is constantly able to reinvent himself and come up with these effectively different careers. That is a tribute to just how talented, how creative, and how much on the ball he is as a guitarist and as a composer.
All Night Long is an up-tempo rocker that harks back to earlier Rainbow classics like Man on a Silver Mountain. Indeed, Blackmore seems to be recycling old riffs for Rainbow's new direction. But the overall effect is that it lands up sounding a bit like a Kiss song, which is probably not what Blackmore fans, or indeed Rainbow fans, were expecting.
I think they were coming, the sound was being cleaned up consciously to broaden the American market, and this is something I can very much relate to because I was brought in supposedly to clean up the sound of Quo, so I can understand the pressures that they were under at that time.
I think All Night Long to some extent is maybe Rainbow's Smoke on the Water. It's one of those songs that's got a very simple, catchy opening riff, and that was often a key element of some of the stuff that Blackmore would produce.
The first couple of bars, you hear that, you know, great sound that Ritchie Blackmore's got. Again, that kind of Deep Purple English rock sound.
It starts with this classic, I think it was in the key of G, this classic guitar riff, and the chorus. Typical Rainbow, but I found it was let down for me personally by a very, very poppy verse.
As it goes into the verse, it's all, you get this kind of ploddy, poppy kind of bass line that's going on, and it's not really got, you know, suddenly all the rock falls out the bottom of it. The choruses, you'll notice that the bass kind of has this driving effect and it stays on one note, this kind of pedal bass note, which suddenly lifts the song into kind of its old roots. You know, you get a lot of that on Deep Purple, but it's too up and down. It's a bit You know, it's on the side of commerce now.
It's played in a powerful, aggressive way. It's got a few little extra twists and turns, sort of like the half-time tempo bit in the middle. But it kind of steams along. It's kind of satisfying to listen to. But it's not Shakespeare, it's not Beethoven, but it's fine for what it is.
When I toured with Rainbow, Ritchie said, well, is there anything that you don't want to do? And I said, well, listen, I can't really do Graeme Bonnet stuff. So we were halfway through a tour and he said, right, we're going to learn All Night Long. And it has a ridiculous key change in it. And I can still, to this day, hear the band laughing at me as I spluttered my way through All Night Long.
I'm gonna love you. I'm gonna be with you all night long. I'm gonna love you. I'm gonna be with you all night long.
All Night Long falls into a strange category because it was a big hit, and purist fans don't like to regard classics as commercial hits. So I don't know why, but that's the kind of view that seems to be taken. And yeah, I mean, All Night Long is no Stargazer, it's no Long Live Rock and Roll, but it's a great song.
As to the question, is it a Rainbow classic? It's got to be a classic insofar as that it widened their audience, and that is no bad thing, certainly to the record company. The increased sales meant that they obviously loved All Night Long.
I don't think All Night Long is a Rainbow classic. I think it's quite a good song on quite a good album. I think that's basically it.
By the time Down to Earth was released, Blackmore had very much been aiming for this American AOR sound, and he found it.
He once said, I think, that he wanted to write a song that would be instantly recognisable, that he would hear the postman whistling as he's walking up the drive. And when he took Rainbow into that direction with the more commercial sounds, then maybe All Night Long was a good example of that sort of thing. The days of the Dio era had gone, and Rainbow had moved on to a new angle.
I get the same old dream, same time every night. Fall to the ground and I wake up. So I get out of bed, put on my shoes, and in my head, thoughts right back to the breakup. These four walls are closing in. Look at the picture of put me in. Since you've been gone, I'm out of my head, can't take it.
Since You've Been Gone is a hard rocker that deserves to take its place among the classic hits of the 70s by Toto, Journey and Starship. It was written by Russ Ballard, who had been a member of Argent and wrote God Gave Rock and Roll to You, as well as then writing hits for Roger Daltrey, Kiss, Three Dog Night and Santana.
The song itself, like most typical pop songs, you can sit down with an acoustic guitar and you can play that song. There are a lot of heavy rock songs that wouldn't work at all like that. You have to have the drums, you have to have the heavy lead guitar sound or the bass or whatever it is. Whereas Since You've Been Gone is definitely a crafted pop song.
Since You've Been Gone is a kind of classic rock song that you will find on all compilation rock albums in the world. I don't think it's a classic Rainbow rock song. I think that's an important point to make. It was their biggest selling single, you know, and I think it introduced them to a whole new generation of, you know, kind of young rockers who would suddenly love the kind of poppy hooks that the song had, infectious chorus. It was a very well written, crafted song, but I don't think it sums up a classic Rainbow moment.
Since You've Been Gone obviously is a classic Rainbow moment. I mean, it was never a band, if you listen to it in its early incarnation, that you would have thought would produce a string of hit singles, but Blackmore decided he wanted it more commercial, he wanted an American style, and they go for it, and this is a perfect example of that.
Since You've Been Gone is again, it's that massive, simple riffing, you know, da-na-na, da-na, da-na. Kind of related to Smoke on the Water somewhere along the line, probably, but yeah, absolute classic stuff. He's the best riffing guitarist, you know, that there's ever been, really, I believe, and that was a classic riff. Great song, absolutely great pop song.
Since You've Been Gone is a favourite, and like All Night Long, it helped to broaden the audience for Rainbow even more, out of just the hard rock fan base into a huge pop market. It's a great vocal from Graeme Bonnet. It's a wonderful solo. Like All Night Long, it featured the half-time link and the solo that dropped down into half-time and the key change.
It's the pop sensibility of the catchy keyboard melody line, the big punchy chorus. Again, it's one of those songs, you hear it today, instant, you know it. That's Since You've Been Gone, that's Rainbow. Even people that don't know Rainbow will go, oh, I know that, I've heard that before. It's one of these kind of songs.
It's a fantastic song, and it's one that even my mum knows, you know, everybody knows that song. And Rainbow had the ability to rock heavy metal crowds, you know, and then they also were a household name during the time of all these singles that they put into the charts, and they covered it all, really.
Certainly for a lot of people, Since You've Been Gone is their most famous song, though it really, in a sense, it's quite different from the earlier, heavier, darker stuff. And always the story goes was that Cozy really didn't like it, and he did kind of one take of the drum track and said, okay, that's it, I'm off. And then later he came round to really, really liking it. But at the time he thought it was much too poppy and too commercial and not this kind of thing that Rainbow should be doing.
Some fans were a bit disgruntled because it was, in a sense, selling out to the pop market. But it was valid. It was absolutely valid. Anything that brought Rainbow to a wider audience is okay in my book, because you can only be niche for so long.
Well, with Dio departing from Rainbow, I think it struck a crucial blow to the band. I don't think they ever really recovered from that.
I think it was difficult for Graeme Bonnet to step in and replace Ronnie James Dio, but this is also part of Ritchie's art. You know, he was very sure, I think, is very sure who he wants in his band, and he found Graeme Bonnet at the right time, and he was the right man. Rainbow never had a bad singer.
I don't think Graeme Bonnet was a suitable replacement for Dio. Not taking anything away from him, but I don't think you're going to find too many people who could replace Dio. He was an original member. You know, people don't like change, except for Ritchie Blackmore, who seemed to change his band endlessly. Graeme Bonnet was a different kind of singer. He had a different approach to it, and I don't think he was as good as Dio.
It's unfair to maybe compare the two. They were different types of singers. Dio was perfect for the earlier stuff with the medieval kind of overtones and the wizards and all this sort of stuff. But as Roger Glover said, when he and Graeme Bonnet came into the band, it was about getting down to earth, which was the name of the album, and so they just needed to have a bit more of a straight down the line kind of rock approach. And Graeme Bonnet was perfect for that, I think.
I had the pleasure of working with Graeme on 2 albums in the 70s, and Graeme was fantastic. He'd never give less than 100%. Probably one of the biggest faults was that he used to, occasionally he would, in the studio, he would sing so hard, he would give 100%, and then he'd be knackered for the rest of the day, so you had to catch the take early in the day. But he was a phenomenal singer, and in actual fact, he had a greater range than Dio. I remember Graeme hitting super high Gs all the time, a much higher clean range than Dio, but for some people's choice, not quite as raw, not quite as aggressive.
Catch the rainbow and see the sky.
Perhaps Graham's problem was that he never really got a chance to establish himself with the band. He was only there for 1 album. He apparently was a somewhat prickly personality, and at that time Ritchie Blackmore was becoming increasingly prone to what looked like Stalinist purges of the band.
Graeme Bonnet's a bit of a funny character, and Rainbow were already a band with characters in them, and obviously it didn't work within the band. There may have been an element of Graeme Bonnet feeling the pressure because of the enormous voice, you know, the space that was left after Ronnie James Dio's voice had gone. But you listen to Down to Earth, I think he acquits himself very, very well indeed. It was a character clash, really, that led to Bonnet's departure from the band.
I loved the Down to Earth album with Graeme Bonnet, yeah. I thought it's different. I mean, they both had incredibly powerful voices. I think Graeme Bonnet's range was fantastic, wasn't it? One of the reasons he probably got the job, and the gravel in his voice. I didn't mind that it changed. Obviously it was something different, but it was still very powerful and very individual sounding, and I thought Down to Earth was a fantastic album with Graeme Bonnet, yeah.
Bobby Rondinelli was a replacement for Cozy Powell. He joined the band in a time that Graeme Bonnet also went, and John Lynn Turner was brought in. So you're now getting a kind of predominantly American band, giving the whole sound more of a kind of commercial and Americanism to it.
And I think that there was a big feeling that these were two faceless Americans, and you know, what's going wrong with our band. In 1981, when Rainbow released Difficult to Cure, a rainbow full of the sword and sorcery lyrics and loon pants and great big dangly shirt sleeves of the Ronnie James Dio era was not going to work. So, you know, so poor old Bobby Rondinelli, I think, got a bit of a rough time because he's a very good drummer.
Bob Rondinelli had a seriously big pair of shoes to fill, stepping in after Cozy Powell had left the situation. And yeah, fantastic drummer. You know, nobody could say that he wasn't, but Cozy Powell really had something special, really brought something very characteristic to Rainbow.
I think when Bobby Rondinelli came into the band, perhaps Ritchie Blackmore was looking for a drummer in a similar style. I always personally thought they were of a similar style. Again, Bobby Rondinelli was a very hard-hitting type of drummer, and obviously Cozy at that point had decided 5 years was enough and had moved on. And I don't think Ritchie Blackmore wanted to really rock the boat too much. He wanted somebody in a similar style. And he was fortunate he found someone like Bobby that could slot in a similar vein to Cozy Powell. And in my opinion, did a similar type of job.
When Bobby Rondinelli came into Rainbow, it was at a time that was starting to get difficult for rock. The 80s, not my favourite era for rock music, to tell you the truth. Corporate pressure was on everybody, every band, to deliver more commercial singles, to refine the sound, to make a drum sound that was more manufactured, if you like. Initially, I was disappointed when he came in. He was a less, for my money, a less raw, a less flamboyant drummer than Cozy Powell. Still a great technician. Some would argue that his bass drum technique was even faster than Cozy Powell's. But a very, very refined player, very, very slick.
He was certainly a very technically brilliant drummer. You know, I mean, Cozy Powell was he had his own sound. I don't know where you could pigeonhole Cozy Powell, but he was kind of a John Bonham, but with a lot more kind of flair, in my personal opinion. You know, he gave it somebody. He had a sounded Cozy Powell. Bob Rondinelli was an amazing drummer with the double bass pedals and stuff. He was like an amazing session drummer, I think, and he was great for the band. It kind of, for me, it lost the individuality that Cozy Powell brought to the band, but then again brought a superb drummer, and Difficult to Cure is probably one of my favourite Rainbow albums.
Bobby Rondinelli was a tough New Yorker, tough sometimes to the point of being abrasive. But he was a rock-solid, loudmouth drummer who put his drums where his mouth was and let his drums do the talking. He had a dizzying array of rhythms he could call on, but he never lost sight of the essential structure of the song.
Cozy used to always slightly have a go at Bobby because he felt that Bobby was just following him in his career and borrowing his style and getting all the jobs immediately after him, because he did that in Rainbow and then in Sabbath later on. And certainly Bobby would have been influenced by Cozy, but he also had a lot of other tricks up his sleeve and a lot of other elements to his playing style. I think perhaps with any musician, it's down to your personality, how you play. And Bobby had a more amenable personality, so was probably more able to be molded into whatever Ritchie wanted, or later on what Tony Iommi wanted. He had massive amounts of ability, but maybe not as much of a strong personality as Cozy did.
I Surrender was another Russ Ballard song that was a pretty blatant assault on the American adult-oriented rock market, this time with Jolyn Turner on vocals. The strident melodies and the big riffs made it even more radio-friendly than Since You've Been Gone, and that was helped still further by Jolyn Turner's tendency to sound a bit like Lou Gramm of Foreigner.
Surrender came from the Difficult to Cure album, 1981, at the time that Bobby Rondinelli and Jolyn Turner came into the band. And as a rock statement, for me, it doesn't necessarily work. I don't think it's one of their greatest moments. And I was actually a bit disappointed in the vocal. I think Jolyn later came with some much better vocal performances. It was, for my money, a conscious attempt to capitalise on the American, slightly AOR rock sound. And just reading between the lines, one would imagine that Ritchie was not altogether happy about this, but again, corporate pressure from the record company A&R men to deliver a single that would be suitable for America, maybe came into it. Not one of my favourite Rainbow tracks.
I Surrender is arguably a very American sounding song, but then you've also got to consider that Jolyn Turner was brought into the band at this point as well, and being American, you're bound to get some of that American influence coming through. Yeah, it definitely has like an East Coast kind of American vibe, that song, but I certainly don't think it was a conscious effort.
It had the drama that I still think it had a very English drama about it. You know, that what Ritchie Blackmore brings to a song, very dramatic, and you can see that in all the guitar lines. I mean, it's probably all the guitar lines that make that song in a way anyway, the drama. But maybe it was American, but I think that's probably more to do with the fact that the singer was American.
I surrender to your heartbeat, doing anything you want me to do. Please be tender. I'm in your hands, girl. This is no feeling I never knew. You know I try to make it on my own. That's not the way it was meant to be.
With a song like I Surrender, you can see that Blackmore's made a conscious attempt to try and Americanise the sound of the band, to make it more commercial and to make it friendly for American airplay. And again, it's a testament to the genius of the man that once he decides to do that, he executes it brilliantly.
It was always going to happen, without a doubt. That's what Blackmore wanted. You know, you might find it odd that a bloke who favours Elizabethan classical music wants his own band to sound so polished and commercial, But that's what Blackmore wanted, and no one questioned what Ritchie Blackmore wanted.
He was aware that perhaps in order for the band to survive commercially and financially, that they had to open up to the masses a lot more.
He likes to hear his songs played in the jukebox, and why not? We're all in it for the glory and for the music and for the money and for the ladies. But, you know, if you walk into a pub and you hear your song being played in the jukebox, it makes your chest swell a wee bit, I would imagine. Not that I've ever had one played in the jukebox.
For me, if there are any traces of rock in the song, which there are, when you hear the guitar, it all falls out the window when the piano comes in the chorus. I think it's you know, it's almost like musical theatre, the chorus. It's you need much more of a kind of rock vibe through it.
Double-barreled Joe Lynn name was enough to raise eyebrows amongst sort of narrow-minded rock fans. The fact that the guy wore red flares and held his microphone like that didn't help. So already, fans are questioning what Rainbow are about now, and the sound has gone even more commercial. It's moving towards American AOR.
One thing that's quite interesting to note, and it's not really acknowledged, is that Roger Glover came into the fold of Rainbow around about the time of Down to Earth, and he was very obviously involved in the production of Rainbow from then on. And you've got to remember that the guy had already produced bands like Nazareth. He'd produced a couple of their very, very successful albums in 73, 74, so he was highly adept as a producer, and still is today. He produces all of Deep Purple's albums today. Extremely talented producer. I think he was the real hidden talent in the band becoming successful in America.
Roger Glover's always favoured a sort of a very sort of polished, almost commercial production sound, and also he got writing, and it, you know, in hindsight, it was easy to see what was going to happen. By the time Rainbow recorded Can't Let You Go, they were under pressure from a lot of older fans for having changed and taken things too far. Joe Lynn Turner, the lead singer, despite, I think, having a fantastic voice, was bearing the brunt not only of the fans' frustration, but many of Ritchie Blackmore's legendary practical jokes. He's very fond of telling interviewers that Joe Lynn Turner wore a wig. Now, if Joe Lynn Turner does wear a wig, I'm sure the last thing he wanted pointing out was that he did. And I think that Bent Out of Shape is the least successful of the three Joe Lynn Turner albums.
By now, Joe Lynn Turner was on his third Rainbow album and seemed to be spearheading the direction the band was heading in, towards that softer, more melodic rock. Ritchie Blackmore, meanwhile, was busy recycling old riffs from Deep Purple to give it a slightly retro feel. And all in all, it was something of a curious mixture.
I don't wanna live a lie, but I don't wanna say goodbye. And I can't let you go, even though it's over. I just can't let you go. I know your love is growing colder.
You know, on songs like Can't Let You Go is a great example of how they would work with melody and form to create a really perfect slice of very commercial rock music.
David Rosenthal's organ intro is absolutely wonderful. The semi-classic organ type thing works a treat. And I actually think it was Joe Lynn Turner's best vocal performance. After that, I think after the intro, the song gets a little bit disjointed for me. It wasn't one of my favourite ones. Some would consider it to be maybe a little bit lightweight even. It did reinforce Ritchie's reputation of being able to come up with very, very commercial melodies, but it wasn't one of my favourite tracks. For me, the intro was the best part. I loved the organ intro. David Rosenthal was a great player, and this was one moment where he was given time to shine.
Can't Let You Go is perhaps one of my favourite Rainbow tracks. A great vocal by Joe Lynn Turner, a very dynamic vocal by Joe Lynn Turner as well. There's lots of high parts going on there for a guy. A very, very well constructed song. Lots and lots of dynamism within the song. You know, it's not just straight verse chorus. It takes you down paths that you're not quite expecting at certain points. Yeah, great song.
Can't Let You Go works as a good pop song. I don't really think this is almost anything to do with Rainbow. I think the hardcore Rainbow fans are going to be pretty disheartened by this point when hearing this song. When you look back at the kind of classics like The Gates of Babylon, Man on a Silver Mountain, Stargazer Live, you know, these are all, you know, real anthems, good old rock anthems. And then you get this song which is brought in, which really, for me, doesn't do them any favours. It's almost, you know, 7 or 8 years down the line, like, you know, Blackmore and Rainbow are now settling for the nice packaged song and are just kind of sitting back rather than pushing the boundaries.
The song strikes me more because it was an amazing song, great words, you know, it's something that most people can relate to. But yeah, it's absolutely superb song and amazing vocal range on the choruses and stuff. Loads of passion. You know, one of the great Rainbow songs again. Different, but
Can't Let You Go, it's okay. It's an above average pop rock song. No more, no less.
I've seen this place before, and you were standing by my side. I've seen our face before tonight. I don't see what I want to be, but still this story. Do you remember on the street of dreams?
By the time of the track Street of Dreams, I think they'd lost the plot a little bit. Ritchie he epitomised for me, although he worked with a lot of Americans, he had quite a few Americans come into his band, it was still a quintessentially English sound, a British rock sound. And it seemed that by Street of Dreams, it was almost as if Ritchie had been content to take a bit of a back seat because the track is very keyboard heavy. Wonderful keyboard playing, but it had always been about the drums and Ritchie's guitar. If you think about the earlier examples of Rainbow, the keyboards weren't over the top. And it was like they'd gone into a different direction again.
It's not what I want to hear from Ritchie Blackmore. If it had been a foreigner track, you know, if it had been Mick Jones playing the guitar, then I would probably have accepted that. But as a fan of Ritchie's thunderous guitar playing, when I buy a Rainbow record, that's what I want to hear. You know, I don't want to be swamped with the keyboard player and have the guitars buried in the background. I want the guitars to be up front.
Something's come over me, and I don't know what to feel. No, I don't. Maybe this fantasy is real.
By Street of Dreams, Rainbow had moved into the world of videos and MTV. The song has got a catchy chorus and there's a tasty guitar solo in the middle. But you'd be hard put to it to find too many defining Rainbow characteristics in that performance.
Street of Dreams is very American, it's very AOR, but is that a bad thing? I don't think so. I think Blackmore had the vision for the band and he took it down that route. That's what he wanted to do. There'd be a lot of fans that didn't like it and a lot of fans that did like it, but you know, he sold albums with it, and I think he probably enjoyed doing that as well.
There are certain burger stores where they're popular. It doesn't make it any good for you, though. I mean, I'd rather have a filet mignon, which would be Eyes of the World or Stargazer or Kill the King, you know, than I would have the Street of Dreams.
I think they lost some of their original fans by becoming seemingly commercial and not so committed to a rainbow style. Towards the end, they sounded rather generic, I mean, rather like Foreigner or many other American bands, which is a bit of a shame, really.
I remember Roger Glover telling me that it was costing them about $50,000 a week to keep Rainbow on the road back in the 80s. So you've got to sell records. And as much as some of the older fans wanted to hear the old Dio era stuff, and as great as it was only appealing to, say, a certain sector of the rock market. And I think Ritchie Blackmore was clever enough to know that he had to maybe open the band up to a wider audience.
You need new blood, new enthusiasm. That's why I like to play with different players every couple of years. Otherwise you get stale. I was playing a lot of football, soccer, and I was in a band called Deep Purple, and they had given up playing soccer. So I thought I must get out of this situation, get some new soccer players, younger people that could play. And that's when I reformed the Rainbow. Now, I was in Purple for, I think the last time, 9 or 10 years. It's long enough.
Stranger Than Us All, I think, is really a neglected masterpiece. It's a superb album. It's a great hard rock sound. It's got wonderful production, and there's a great evenness about the quality of the songwriting. It's universally very high, and it's a great album.
Well, funny enough, I didn't even know the album existed. I mean, I even went to see the band when they reformed in about '95, and they were playing material off this album that I didn't know was out, you know, and I still didn't know till last year when I got the album. So I guess it is neglected, yeah. I mean, it sounded brilliant live, you know. I thought Doogie White did a great job, really powerful. I thought, why is it stopping? You know, this is a great concert, great band again, you know.
Doogie White really had a very difficult role to play in Rainbow. He came in right at the very end of the Rainbow lifespan, and he had to sort of fill the boots of every other Rainbow singer there ever had been, and then there is always somebody out there in the crowd when you're putting yourself across that's always thinking Geraldine Turner perhaps did it better, Graeme Bonnet perhaps did it better, but I really think he held his own. He was a very, very strong frontman, and in the true sense of the word, you know, he wasn't just a vocalist, he really sort of had the power to captivate a crowd too.
It's too late for tears.
Well, I got the gig with Rainbow quite out of the blue, actually. I had gone to see Deep Purple in 1990 when Joe Turner was in the band, and I was very poor at the time, and a friend of mine who worked for the record company knew I was a huge Purple fan, and he gave me a ticket for the show and a backstage a party pass for the after show party. So I made up a little cassette with 4 songs on it, put my telephone number on it, my name and stuff, and gave it to Colin Hart, who was then Purple's tour manager. And I never thought any more about it.
It started with my girlfriend giving me a tape of Doogie, and I played it. It's very good.
I came back from Germany where I had been recording with another band, and there was a sign on my door, saying Ritchie Blackmore's secretary's called. Can you phone this number? We're all very excited. So I called but didn't get a reply, but left a message. And on the Saturday we were having a party in the house, and the telephone went. Picked it up, and it's, "Hi, this is Ritchie Blackmore." I'm going, "Yeah, right." He goes, no, really it is. And I said, "Okay, if you're Ritchie Blackmore, you need to answer me this question." And he said, "Go on." And I said, "The song Hold On from the Stormbringer album, what's so special about the guitar solo?"
I did play the whole entire thing with my thumb.
And I said, "Right, Ritchie, what can I do for you?" And he says, "Well, listen, I've been listening to your tape. I like your voice. Can you send me a recent picture over so I can get a look at you?" So I did that.
And I said, "Come on over."
Within a week to 10 days, I was flying out to New York to audition for Rainbow. And 10 years ago, on the 20th of April, he asked me to join the band, and I was more than happy to take that up. It was great. Before we started recording the album, we had 6 weeks in upstate New York in a place called Cold Spring on the Hudson. And we went up there and we played soccer, football for us Brits. And we played a lot of football, and we went out to dinner a lot, and we drank lots of wine. And we also wrote music. And I would be lying in my bed and I'd hear, and that'd be, oops, Ritchie's down ready to start, so we'd all run down and we'd all get in there. And of course he wouldn't be there, you know. So then he would come back in and we'd start jamming. And Stand and Fight was one of the very first ideas we ever came up with. And we wrote quite a lot of songs up there actually, but they got lost because Ritchie took all the tapes. Again, I was taping the stuff, and at the end of it, he took all the tapes away. So there was nothing left that we could go back. I could go back and reference, because he didn't want any of this stuff getting out. Quite rightly so. These days, I would be selling it on eBay for 100 quid a pop. So Stand and Fight was one of the ones that had been left, and it was lying around. And so when we went in, it was one of the first songs we recorded for the album. It's a simple song with, you know, mouth organ. It was just a way of us easing into the actual recording process.
Days of old are hidden in these walls. Hear the witches play their tunes, sing their songs to the moon. As the way the night will move in the hall of the Mountain King.
Well, the Hall of the Mountain King is a Grieg piece, and Ritchie's been playing it since the 60s. And he decided that he wanted to make a song out of it. And I went and bought the book and read the book, the relevant chapter, to get a flavour for it, started writing lyrics. And he came in and said, "Candy has written the lyrics for this." And I was like, "Oh, okay then." So we sat down, and the producer said, "Now I want you to sing it in your blues voice, Doogie." And I said, "But it's a classical piece." "Ah, but you've got to get that sort of bluesy tone." So we tried it, and we tried it. And it wasn't in a blues key. It's not a blues scale. You can't sing it in a blues. In the blues, it's classical. You've got to sing it in a sort of manic fashion. And all of a sudden, I'm covered in water when I'm trying to sing this. And I look up to the balcony, and there's Ritchie standing with a couple of water pistols firing at me. And he comes down and he says, "What is going on? I've been gone 4 hours and you haven't even got one line down." And I said, "Well, Pat's trying to get me to sing it in a blues style." He said, "Sing it." So I sang it, and one take, it was down. We did a couple of repairs on a couple of words where the timing was a bit weird, and he said, "That's it, leave it." So, and of course, I'm ready to kill Pat. I mean, I'm like, "Ugh." And so we go, Pat says, "Come on, I'll take you for dinner." Ritchie had told him to get me to sing it in a blues style because he knew it couldn't be done. Nothing Humans was written in Longview Farm Studios in the barn on a cold winter's day, the day after Fred West hung himself. And it was written in 45 minutes. Ritchie just said boom, bam, boom, bam, boom, bam. And I used to have a tape recorder similar to this one here, and I would tape everything. And it would be my, you know, we'd be there for hours, and I would just have tapes and I'd be labeling them. And it was my job at the end of the day to go back and make up a best of the day tape of, you know, you do it, I'm not listening to it, you go and do it. Because I loved listening to it anyway. I'm getting to listen to Ritchie Blackmore for free. Right? And that was on there and never changed. I changed a couple of the lyrics, you know, just to make it work better. But it was written in 45 minutes, only 2 takes. And it never changed from that day. And it's written about someone who goes out and hunts humans and, you know, loves dead bodies. It was really, Fred West killed himself that day, but it's based on Dennis Nielsen, who was a Scottish guy who murdered 7 or 8 women, young boys actually, in Muswell Hill and flushed them down the toilet. So it's a love song. Ritchie would come in to, it was whenever he was ready to do it. I mean, if the rest of the band were there and he wasn't there and we were jamming, he would just walk in and pick up the guitar and start playing whatever he wanted to play. He wouldn't join in. It was very much his, you know, he wouldn't come in and say, oh, that's a good idea. He had an idea that maybe he had come up with that night or that he'd thought about when he was walking down the stairs, when he was in a shower or something, and he would come in, nothing was ever planned, and he would just come in and start playing. And we would jam it round and it would just sort of find its merry way to wherever it was going to go, or it wouldn't, or it wasn't going to go. And that's why it was my job to tape everything, because sometimes the songs only happened that once, and if you didn't have them, you lost it. And we did a song in the album called Ariel, which was another one that Ritchie and Candy wrote together. And Ritchie was just playing himself in the hall before anybody else got there. And the riff, he was playing the riff and then another riff, but separately. And I took the two of them and put them together, and that made up the Ariel riff. I said, look, this works. And he went off and he wrote it, and then he gave, him and Candy came up with the melody and the lyrics, and that became Ariel. Because he was playing ba-na, 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 and then later on he was da-da-da-da-da. So I was cutting these bits of tape and putting them together, and it just worked. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, and some folk will go, he's just talking rubbish. But it's true. I mean, I had to pick all the bits, because he wasn't going to listen through to 8 hours of tape, you know. It was a pleasure for me to do it. But I had to give him them all back again, so they're probably rotting in his garage somewhere. The Stranger in Us All album was too, for me, overproduced and too slick. And there's a thin line between the British rock, that hard rock sound, and the American slick radio-friendly sound, and we crossed that line. I took 23 days to sing 11 songs. I can do a song a day, but the producer wanted another take and another take to make it perfect. But we weren't making a Def Leppard record. It was supposed to be loose rock and roll. But then it wasn't Doogie White's Rainbow, it was Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. He gets to do what he likes.
I think the very last album could have been built on, and the band could have gone in a very exciting hard rock direction. I think Doogie White brought a superb technical ability to the band, and lyrically he was steering it much more towards Dio territory. So you were getting to that stage where you felt there was tremendous potential in Rainbow.
until that one day when you did, and that was it. It was as quick as that, and it was just done. And there's no reason for it that I can pinpoint. He may be able to tell you a reason, or somebody else might be able to tell you a reason. I can't think of one. He was probably fed up with my little Scottish voice by then.
In many respects, I think Doogie White was probably the best rainbow singer of all, but we just didn't have enough of, we didn't see enough of him. There's only the one album, and it's a real shame that there wasn't more to come after that.
I wouldn't say it was the strongest album they ever did, really. You know, I mean, there was a magic about every single album previously, and that was kind of, I got the feeling it was a little bit thrown together. There's some great songs on it, though.
Stranger in Us All is perhaps one of the most neglected Rainbow albums. But I certainly don't think it was a weak album. It was perhaps an album that was really seeing the beginnings of Ritchie straying from the Rainbow idea. You know, Candice Knight was involved in that project. She began to sing the backing vocals, and she also co-wrote a couple of the tracks on there. And you could really see maybe the first sort of bubblings of the project, Blackmore's Night, happening there. So I think, again, that was like perhaps an album, but within a transitional period.
Over the course of 9 years in Rainbow, Ritchie Blackmore got through 3 singers, 4 drummers, 5 bassists and 5 keyboard players. This might suggest that he was perhaps a difficult guy to get on with. And perhaps it's no accident that Ronnie James Dio and Cozy Powell probably brought the best out of Ritchie Blackmore by being as good a musician as he was.
Well, I think Blackmore, you know, when he had Rainbow, surrounded himself with highly proficient musicians all of the time. And, you know, he had the reputation for hiring and firing from one minute to the next, but that was often personality as much as anything else, not really the musical ability or the lack of musical ability. I think most of these musicians, if not all, were extremely proficient.
Rainbow, for me, is Ritchie Blackmore's second band. Again, obviously his talent was displayed throughout for picking the right musicians for the band at the time. Cozy Powell was a very, very special player, and I think he gelled with Ritchie really, really well. They kind of had their own sort of unit of chemistry going on there. And I think this is true of really every lineup that Rainbow had. There wasn't really a weak one, but certainly Ritchie and Cozy, for me, are the standout players in Rainbow.
Funnily enough, having criticised Street of Dreams, I think David Rosenthal's keyboard work was absolutely priceless. I think it was wonderful. Tony Carey on Tarot Woman, fantastic performance. Bob Daisley, always a fantastic performance. David Stone on Babylon was absolutely fantastic. But throughout the whole era, throughout the whole Rainbow duration, if you like, for me, it was very much Ritchie Blackmore, and deservedly so. He was one of the most underrated British guitarists ever to live.
The outstanding musicians for the early years, of course, was Blackmore and Ronnie James Dio, and he had great rhythm section as well, great keyboard players. In the later years, the outstanding musicians for me were Blackmore and, of course, Roger Glover, and not just for his bass playing, it was his production skills. I think Roger Glover is a producer that today's younger producers could learn a lot from.
Roger Glover was always there, you know, doing a lot of kind of understated bass work that people probably took for granted, but if you listen, you know, it's amazing what the guy's doing. He's there all the time, you know. I mean, so I guess Ritchie, the singers, and the bass player, and Cozy, and then after that it was kind of, yeah, the keyboardists were always great, you know, they always had a great sound, and they added a lot to the band, but it was kind of more about just adding to the songs that were already there, I think.
Name your favourite Rainbow lineup from anybody that's been in a band. Well, obviously it has to be Ritchie Blackmore on guitar. Probably Roger Glover on bass, Cozy Powell on drums, Ronnie James Dio on vocals, and then probably Don Airey on keyboards.
The musicians that stand out to me throughout Rainbow's career has to be, first and foremost, Ritchie Blackmore. Also, you've got the kind of inimitable voice of Ronnie James Dio, who for me was their best front man. Maybe I'm biased, but Cozy Powell for me has got to be, he's one of my favourite drummers and really added this kind of earthy British rock style drumming to the group, along with the bass playing of Jimmy Bain and Tony Carey on keyboards. You could say that this is the lineup between 76 and 79, but for me that's what Rainbow were all about, and they're the members that stood out.
I think the world's not heard the last of Ritchie Blackmore, and I think I would love to hear another major rock project of his.
When you look at how Iron Maiden have come back and triumphed all over the world, and how AC/DC are still doing it, there's a place for Ritchie to put a new Rainbow together and to go out there and to recapture it all again. It wouldn't be a problem. So, we'll watch and see.